I suppose it's not something anyone anticipates, sitting across from a doctor only to hear they're ticking down the days of your life. I hadn't really noticed anything major, just a few dizzy spells now and then, a touch of fatigue. You shrug it off, right? It's easy to think maybe you're just overworked or not catching enough Z's. But there I was perched in that sterile white room, staring at this guy in a lab coat as he dropped the bombshell. I had about 3 years left to live. 3 damn years. The impact of those words hit me like a freight train barreling down the tracks. Ethan, you have an incurable disease. That's how he put it, and I swear the moment he said it, the world began to spin. My mouth went dry, and for the first time ever, I was utterly at a loss for words. How does one even respond to something like that? Surprisingly, I didn't bolt from the office in a frenzy. Instead, I just nodded along, numb to it all. Afterward, I found myself back at home, sitting in my car for what felt like hours, staring blankly ahead, grappling with the reality of what I was supposed to do next. I mean, how does one map out the rest of their life when they know exactly when the curtain is set to fall? Initially, my thoughts drifted to Lily. I imagined we'd sit down together, and I'd break the news to her. There would be tears, maybe some shouting, and perhaps she'd wrap her arms around me in comfort. I envisioned it all like a scene from a movie where the devoted wife puts aside everything to support her dying husband. But oh no, life had a different script in mind for me. You see, Lily had been acting strangely for a while, staying out late, raving about her new friend Marcus from work. At first, I brushed it off. I trusted her, you know? I was so consumed with work and grappling with my health issues that I overlooked the signs right in front of my face. It started subtly. Little things, like how she'd come home reeking of a mix of his cologne and the cheap perfume she bought at the mall. Her texts would often go unanswered for hours, despite her claims of being busy with work. But when I caught her giggling at her phone like some schoolgirl, the pieces started falling into place. Then there were those random nights out with the girls, but curiously, I never heard from any of them. It was always about Marcus. I couldn't shake the sense that something was amiss, but a part of me hesitated to dig deeper. Not yet. Not with everything else weighing down on me. But the universe isn't known for giving you a breather, is it? One evening, she left her phone unattended on the kitchen counter while she took a shower. It buzzed, and I caught a glimpse of Marcus's name with a ridiculous heart emoji beside it. My chest tightened, and my hands trembled as I opened the message. I can't wait to see you again tomorrow. Last night was perfect. Winky face. There it was, just like that. Plain as day on the screen, my world came crashing down. The woman I'd pledged my life to, the one I thought would be right there holding my hand when I needed it most, was with my friend, a guy I'd shared beers and laughs with. That bastard was making moves on her, while I was reeling from the news that my time was running out. I felt as if I couldn't catch my breath. I stood there, phone clutched tightly, reading the message repeatedly until the words were etched into my mind. I felt sick, like I might hurl right there on the kitchen floor. When Lily returned, she saw me standing there, ghostly pale, clutching her phone. Her eyes widened for a moment, but she didn't speak immediately. Wordlessly, I handed her the phone. She glanced down at the screen, and in that instant, something snapped inside me. I didn't scream. I didn't shed a tear. I simply stared at her, waiting for some half-hearted excuse, some flimsy lie to patch the wreckage she created. Ethan, I can explain. That was all she could muster. Explain? What could she possibly say? The proof was right in my hands. I didn't lose it immediately. Instead, I just nodded, turned on my heel, and walked out. I needed air, some space, time to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. A part of me, the one that had loved her so deeply for so long, considered the possibility of forgiveness. Maybe she'd just made a mistake, right? We're all human, after all. But another part of me, the one now crushed under the weight of betrayal and my diagnosis, craved vengeance. I had nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerously unpredictable. In the days that followed, I began to notice every tiny detail. How she meticulously got dressed, how her laughter felt forced and too loud, how she was always too tired for intimacy, but somehow had endless energy to sneak off for hours. I couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on anything but them. I'd watch her leave, fully aware she wasn't just heading to work. Every touch from her felt like a betrayal. I knew I couldn't confront her yet, not until I had something solid, something I could throw in her face. That's when I met Chloe. She was the therapist I found when I finally couldn't hold it in any longer. I needed someone to confide in, someone who would be blunt and honest. And Chloe, well, she wasn't your typical therapist. She was sharp, straightforward. And from the get-go, I could tell she wouldn't be one of those forgive and forget types. No, Chloe got me in a way that no one else had. She helped me realize that what I was feeling wasn't just anger. It was a fight for survival. I was a man cornered, facing the grim reality of my life ending. And I had no time left for bullshit. Lily had transformed into just another hurdle I had to overcome, something to confront and deal with. In the weeks that followed, I began to scrutinize Lily more closely. I'd tail her, sneak a peek at her texts whenever she left her phone unattended, and even check our joint bank account to see if she was funneling money to this guy. The more I dug, the clearer it became just how deep her betrayal ran. And Marcus? He wasn't merely a fleeting fling. They were meeting at hotels, exchanging gifts, planning who knows what behind my back. I felt the anger simmering beneath the surface, but I kept it all bottled up, waiting for the right moment. Now, it wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about payback. There was no way she was going to waltz away from this unscathed. Not after everything I'd endured. Forgiveness? That was off the table. After all I had unearthed, I understood there was nothing left worth saving. My marriage? A complete joke. The woman I had dedicated my life to, who I believed would stand by me as I faced the end, was with a guy I used to share beers with. Marcus. Just saying his name made my blood boil. But I wasn't going to be the fool who simply walked away. No way. I had a finite number of days left, and I wasn't going to waste a single one allowing her to slip away unscathed. Lily had no idea what was coming for her. The plan began to take shape slowly, almost instinctively. You could say I've always had a strategic mindset, always thinking a few steps ahead. Now that instinct was in overdrive. I knew I couldn't confront her immediately. That would be too tidy, too quick. Instead, I was determined to ensure everything Lily and Marcus had built together crumbled piece by piece. The first step was amassing evidence. I became consumed with tracking Lily's every move, every message she sent, every lie that slipped from her lips. It wasn't difficult. People like Lily tend to get sloppy when they think they've escaped unscathed. She'd leave her phone lying around or forget to erase texts. With just a bit of patience, I ended up with a folder brimming with screenshots, emails, and texts that laid everything bare. Marcus was equally reckless. He wasn't a cunning mastermind. No, he was an arrogant jerk who thought he could do whatever he pleased, convinced that no one was watching. But I was, and I ensured I dug deeper into his life too. See, Marcus had his own skeletons far beyond just sleeping with my wife. He was cutting corners at work, fudging numbers, and making shady deals that could get him into serious trouble if the right people caught wind. I tucked that information away, knowing I could wield it when the moment was right. I didn't rush to the kill. I took my time. It was about laying the groundwork, ensuring every move I made was deliberate and calculated. I started small, implementing subtle manipulations here and there, arranging situations to cast Lily in a guilty light in front of our friends, planting little accidents where people would overhear just enough to start sowing doubt. For instance, we hosted a dinner party with our closest friends, people we'd known for ages. I made sure to casually mention Marcus in conversation, just enough to plant the seed of suspicion. Yeah, Lily and Marcus have been spending a lot of time together at work lately. I'd say, shooting a knowing glance to the person beside me. The gossip spread like wildfire. By the end of the night, a few raised eyebrows had escalated into full-blown whispers. And Lily, blissfully unaware, didn't even recognize she was sinking into quicksand. As I worked to tarnish her reputation, I began applying pressure on Marcus. I blackmailed him with the dirt I had on his professional misconduct. It wasn't hard to push him into making mistakes. With a few well-timed emails and calls, I ensured his boss started scrutinizing his work. Errors piled up, and Marcus found himself scrambling. The beauty of it all was that he had no clue I was the one pulling the strings. To him, his perfect little life was unraveling all on its own. That's when Chloe truly stepped up. She wasn't just my therapist anymore. She had become my ally in this whole mess. I hadn't planned for it, but she understood me better than anyone else at that moment. I don't know how it happened, but our conversations shifted beyond just my feelings. We began strategizing, and man, she was exceptional at it. "Ethan, if you really want to hit them where it hurts, you need to be patient," she would tell me, sitting across from me in her office. "Let them implode. Just give them a nudge." She was spot on. Chloe helped me realize that revenge wasn't merely about striking back. It was about making them feel every ounce of the pain they'd inflicted on me, slowly and deliberately. I began to view Lily less as my wife and more as a target, someone to be dealt with. Chloe even introduced me to Noah, one of Lily's colleagues, who had his own suspicions about her. He was a quiet guy, always observing from the sidelines. Turns out, he had noticed Lily's behavior at work, how she'd flirt with Marcus openly, how they would sneak off together during lunch breaks. Noah wasn't a fan of Marcus, especially after being passed over for a promotion because of him. With Noah's help, I gathered even more dirt on Lily's antics at work. Apparently, she and Marcus had been getting a bit too cozy in the office, and plenty of rumors were swirling around. Perfect. Just another card to play when the time was right. Then there was Dylan, my old buddy from way back. We hadn't kept in touch much over the years, but when I confided in him about what was going on, he jumped in with both feet. Dylan had always been the type who thrived on conflict, especially when it came to settling scores. He started brainstorming ways to expose Lily and Marcus, subtly planting ideas in the minds of our mutual friends, getting them to ask questions without ever tipping them off about my involvement. The more I collaborated with Dylan and Chloe, the more my plan crystallized. We were going to take them both down, but I didn't want it to be obvious. No, I wanted Lily to disintegrate on her own, with everyone around her witnessing her unraveling, while I stood by, calm, composed, and entirely in control. I didn't just want to hurt her. I aimed to demolish her entire existence. And Marcus? He was merely collateral damage. As the days went by, I noticed the cracks starting to appear. Lily was stressed, snapping at me for no reason, losing her cool over trivial matters. She had no clue that she was playing right into my hands. Each time she got flustered, every time someone innocently asked her about Marcus, I could see the panic flash across her face. She was unraveling, and I hadn't even begun to execute my full plan. Marcus, on the other hand, was already teetering on the edge of losing his job, thanks to my meticulously crafted blackmail. He was making mistake after mistake, desperately trying to cover his tracks, but only digging himself deeper. It was almost too easy. I kept my cool throughout the chaos, playing the loving husband on the surface while pulling all the strings behind the scenes. I wanted to time everything just right, so when the final blow landed, neither of them would see it coming. Because this was no longer just about revenge. It was about regaining control, about taking back what they had stolen from me. True revenge, when executed well, isn't a single blow. It's a slow, excruciating process that dismantles someone piece by piece, leaving them with nothing. And Lily? She was about to learn that lesson the hard way. It all began with the affair. I had the evidence lined up, texts, emails, those heart emojis that used to make my stomach churn, ready to unleash. The thing about affairs is that they thrive in darkness, and I was about to drag everything into the glaring light. One evening, I decided to drop the first bomb. We hosted a small gathering at our home. Close friends, colleagues, people who knew both Lily and me. I played the role of the doting husband while she flitted around, blissfully unaware of what was coming. After a few drinks, I casually mentioned Lily and Marcus's work relationship, just to stir the pot. They've been spending a lot of time together, I said, locking eyes with our mutual friend Karen, known for her propensity to gossip. The room fell silent. Lily froze. I caught a glimpse of her smile falter for just a heartbeat before she regained her composure. But the damage had been done. Karen's eyes lit up like she'd just stumbled upon the juiciest scoop. Within days, the rumors were swirling. Lily started receiving weird looks at the grocery store and whispers behind her back during yoga class. Her phone was inundated with messages from friends asking, "Is everything okay with you and Ethan? I heard some things." The second wave hit when I anonymously sent screenshots of her texts with Marcus to a few select individuals. Just enough to stir the drama pot, but not enough for Lily to figure out who was behind it. Her social circle, the very people she had been so proud to show off, began to fragment. Invitations to brunch were mysteriously lost, and the friendly chats she used to enjoy with other moms at the kids' school became stilted and cold. Lily was losing her grip, and she had no clue why. As her friends faded away, it was time to strike where it truly hurt: her job. I knew Lily's position at work was precarious. She had always leaned on her charm, flirting her way out of tough situations, but I learned her reputation was hanging by a thread. I was determined to snap that thread. Noah, her colleague, was more than willing to assist. He wasn't fond of Lily's behavior at work, especially how she cozied up to Marcus, and he had already collected sensitive information about her. Together, we orchestrated a series of incidents. Lily missed crucial meetings, deadlines were mysteriously overlooked, and complaints about her conduct began to pile up. I ensured Lily remained distracted during this time, introducing new people into her life, people who preyed on her emotions. Noah was one of them, feeding her misinformation, making her believe that Marcus was saying things behind her back, that he was losing interest in her. It was all complete nonsense, but Lily was too paranoid to see through it. At the same time, I engineered a situation that led to Lily being summoned to a disciplinary meeting at work. She was humiliated, and the whispers spread like wildfire around the office. Eventually, the pressure became too much for her. She snapped at a superior during a meeting, something she would have never done if she weren't on edge, and that sealed her fate. She was asked to leave the company. When she came home that day, she was pale and shaking. "I got fired," she murmured, her voice barely audible. I played the part of the supportive husband, giving her a sympathetic smile and holding her close. Inside, though, I was celebrating. It was everything I had hoped for. With no job and no friends to lean on, Lily became more dependent on me than ever. I ensured she remained financially reliant on me, keeping her from seeking new employment and quietly sabotaging any opportunities that came her way. She'd apply for jobs, and I'd make sure they mysteriously fell through. As for Marcus, he was starting to feel the pressure too. Not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, he was crumbling under the weight of my manipulation at work. Tensions between him and Lily began to rise. At first, it was subtle, minor arguments here and there, but I could see the cracks forming. I used that to my advantage. Noah, always the little instigator, began whispering lies about Marcus into Lily's ear. He told her that Marcus was seeing another woman at work, that he was pulling away. Of course, I knew exactly how this would play out. Lily became jealous, clingy, and increasingly demanding, which only pushed Marcus further away. Their relationship had been built on deceit and excitement, but now that everything was out in the open, the thrill was gone. Marcus had no interest in playing house with a woman who was losing her job, her friends, and her sanity. He began to withdraw, and Lily's desperation only intensified. I watched the whole scenario unfold like a carefully crafted drama. Their fights escalated in volume and intensity. I could hear her screaming into the phone late at night, accusing Marcus of cheating and lying to her. The irony of it all was almost too rich. I knew it was just a matter of time before everything imploded. And imploded did. The final blow came when I shared a series of photos online, meticulously chosen to suggest that Lily was still seeing Marcus behind my back. In reality, they hadn't met in weeks, but nobody needed to know that. The photos spread through our social circle like wildfire, and suddenly, Lily became persona non grata. People stopped answering her calls, ignored her messages. She was officially a pariah. Marcus, eager to distance himself from the chaos, ended things with her completely. That night, Lily came home, shattered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's gone," she cried. "Marcus left me." I felt absolutely nothing. I looked at her, this hollow version of the confident woman she once was, and felt nothing. My plan had worked. I had dismantled her life piece by piece, and she didn't even realize it was me pulling the strings the whole time. But I wasn't finished yet. After everything I had endured, the betrayal, the lies, the endless scheming, there was this strange stillness. Lily's life lay in ruins. Marcus was long gone, and the social circles that once revolved around her had completely shut her out. Yet, I didn't feel triumphant or euphoric. It was something different. Relief, perhaps. Freedom, definitely. For the first time in ages, I wasn't shackled by the anger and pain she had inflicted upon me. I could finally breathe. I remember sitting in the living room of the house we had once shared, her crying in the next room, likely begging someone else for comfort this time, and surveying all the things that had once meant something to me. The photos of us on vacations, the souvenirs we collected along the way. It all felt like remnants of a different life, belonging to a different person. I realized it was time to leave it all behind. I didn't make a fuss. I wasn't about to give Lily the satisfaction of knowing she had any control over me. I simply packed my bags, sold off most of my belongings, and took off. Everything I needed fit into a couple of suitcases. The house, the furniture, the remnants of our life together. I left it all behind, just as I left her. My first destination wasn't far, just a little cabin I rented in the mountains. I'd always fantasized about living in a place like that, isolated, tranquil, with no one around to bother me. It was perfect. For a while, I did nothing but hike through the woods and sit by the fire, letting the silence wash over me. It felt like a cleansing of sorts, a reset, but that silence could only last so long. After everything that had transpired, I wasn't about to sit idly by waiting for my time to run out. No, I had 3 years left, give or take, and I intended to make every single one of them count. That's when I resolved to push the limits, to truly live in ways I had never dared before. The first item on my list? Extreme sports. I had always been the guy who watched others take risks, too frightened to jump out of a plane or climb a mountain. But now, what did I have to lose? I signed up for skydiving first. I'll never forget that moment when the plane door swung open and the wind hit my face. My heart raced, my hands trembled, but there was no turning back. The moment I leaped, all my fear vanished. The rush of free fall, the ground rushing toward me. It was an experience unlike anything I had ever known. I felt alive in every conceivable way. I craved that sensation after feeling so numb for so long. Skydiving led me to bungee jumping, which led to rock climbing, and somehow I found myself in some of the most dangerous places in the world. There's something addictive about staring death in the face, especially when you know it's already on its way. I climbed mountains in the Alps, trekked through jungles in South America, and even ended up in a back alley bar in Thailand, drinking with people whose names I would never remember. It was there that I met Jake. Jake was a former soldier, a war veteran who had seen his fair share of close calls. We crossed paths in one of those seedy bars in Bangkok. He was quiet at first, keeping to himself, but there was an air about him that intrigued me. Perhaps it was the way he carried himself, as if he had faced hell and come out the other side standing. We struck up a conversation over drinks, and it didn't take long for us to hit it off. Jake had his own demons, stuff he didn't delve into much, but he understood what it meant to live with an expiration date. He had been shot, blown up, and nearly killed more times than he could count. For him, living wasn't merely about survival. It was about pushing boundaries, seeking that edge where you truly feel alive. He showed me things I hadn't even considered: how to navigate high-stress situations, how to confront the fear that accompanies the inevitable. Jake became something of a mentor to me. We embarked on adventures that would make most people balk, jumping from helicopters, diving into shark-infested waters, even sneaking into places we definitely shouldn't have been. But it wasn't solely about the adrenaline. Jake had a knack for helping me dismantle the psychological barriers I had constructed over the years. He helped me understand that my fear wasn't about dying. It was about living with regrets. And I refused to let that happen. That's when the other side of my newfound freedom began to blossom. I had spent so long with Lily that I'd forgotten what it felt like to simply be free. No obligations, no ties, no emotional baggage. So, I began to explore that freedom in ways I had never imagined before. The first time I slept with someone new after Lily, it felt like a door swung wide open. I wasn't looking for anything serious. Hell, I wasn't even searching for romance. I just craved a different experience, something raw and unfiltered. And I got it. There were no strings attached, no awkward morning after conversations. Just two people fulfilling their needs. As the weeks rolled on, I became increasingly bold. I started seeing multiple women, sometimes juggling them at the same time. I didn't shy away from experimentation, diving into experiences I had never had the guts to try before. Threesomes, casual encounters in hotel rooms, even the occasional visit to places where pleasure and fantasy blurred. I wanted to absorb it all. Every touch, every sensation, every forbidden thrill. And why shouldn't I? I had nothing left to lose. Along the way, I met an array of people who became part of my journey. Women who sought nothing more than a night of passion, and men like Jake, who taught me what it meant to push boundaries. Some lingered in my life for a while others faded into the background. But each one left a mark on me, a reminder that I was alive in a way I had never felt before. But it wasn't solely about the sex or the adrenaline anymore. It was about reclaiming my life on my own terms. I had been trapped in a marriage that suffocated me, in a life that had narrowed to a painful singularity. Now, with nothing holding me back, I was finally living the way I had always desired. Every day, I woke up with a sense of purpose. Not the kind that stems from a job or a relationship, but the purpose of squeezing every last drop from life before the clock ran out. I was reckless, yes, but for the first time in years, I felt free. Eventually, however, the rush begins to wane. The thrill of skydiving, the fleeting satisfaction of one-night stands, even the bittersweet taste of revenge. It all fades. I hadn't anticipated this, but after everything I'd done and every limit I'd pushed, I began to feel empty. You'd think living life with reckless abandon and grabbing it by the throat would fill you up, but it didn't. Not for long, anyway. There were days I would wake up in whatever city I found myself and just stare at the ceiling, wondering what it was all for. I had dedicated so much energy to plotting Lily's downfall, ensuring she paid for her betrayal, that I hadn't considered what would come next. What happens after you've won? When there's nothing left to fight against? The answer, it turns out, is a peculiar sort of loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being alone. God knows I had enough people around me to stave that off, but the kind that creeps in when there's nothing left to fuel you. I'd find myself sitting there, amidst breathtaking views, a mountain peak or a cliff overlooking the ocean, and feel a sense of relief, yes, but also a profound hollowness. I had spent my last few years chasing thrills, running from the ticking clock, but what had I truly discovered? Freedom, absolutely, but also an undeniable realization that revenge didn't heal anything. It didn't restore the time I'd lost or the person I had been before all of this. In one of those quiet moments, far from anywhere, I found myself reflecting on everything. I didn't regret my actions. Not at all. Lily deserved every ounce of it. But the satisfaction I had anticipated eluded me. I wasn't sitting there thinking, yes, I won. Instead, I was consumed by the question, what now? That question lingered in the air for a while, unanswered, until one day, when I least expected it, the past walked back into my life. I was in a cafe, a quaint little spot I'd stumbled upon in a random town I'd never heard of before. I had just ordered a coffee when I turned around and saw her. Lily. After all these years, after everything that had transpired, there she was, standing in line, oblivious to my presence at first. She looked different. Not in a bad way, just changed. She had aged, as we all do, but it was more than that. She appeared worn, tired, as if life had chewed her up and spit her out. I felt my chest tighten, a swirl of emotions rushing through me. Anger, nostalgia, maybe even a touch of pity. She hadn't noticed me yet, so I took a moment to observe her. She was alone. No ring on her finger, no one by her side. Her clothes were simple, lacking the flashy outfits she once donned to impress. She looked like someone who had been humbled by life. I could have just walked away. I could have turned my back on her and continued on my path without glancing back. But I didn't. Instead, I approached her and said, "Lily." She looked up, and in that moment, I caught the flicker of recognition in her eyes, quickly followed by shock, and then something resembling shame. There was a pause, a silence that felt heavy as we stood there, grappling with the weight of everything that had transpired. "Ethan," she finally breathed, her voice soft and fragile. Initially, we didn't have much to say. What could we say? But somehow, we found ourselves seated together, chatting over coffee as if we were two old friends who had weathered a storm together. She didn't offer an apology, and I didn't ask for one. It just wasn't that kind of conversation. She opened up about her life since everything fell apart. The struggles, how Marcus had abandoned her, how she lost her job and moved from place to place in search of stability. I wasn't sure what emotions I expected to feel, but satisfaction certainly wasn't among them. I didn't revel in seeing her like this, nor did I have a triumphant, "I told you so" moment. I simply listened, and in the midst of her recounting her struggles, I realized that I had no lingering anger. The rage that had fueled me was gone. I'd done what I set out to do. I had dismantled her life. And now, seeing her in this state, all I could think was, it's over. We didn't exchange phone numbers or make plans to reconnect. We finished our coffee, said our goodbyes, and parted ways. It felt like the closure I didn't know I needed. After our encounter, something shifted within me. I found myself chasing that initial high less fiercely. I still traveled and took risks, but my approach had changed. I began to contemplate what legacy I wanted to leave behind when my time was up. That's when fate intervened, leading me to make an investment that would pay off unexpectedly. I had taken a portion of my remaining savings and put it into a small tech startup. I didn't know much about it, just a tip I'd received from someone I met during my travels. I figured, why not take a chance? If it flopped, I wouldn't lose sleep over it. I wasn't particularly concerned about retirement, but it didn't flop. Instead, it soared. One morning, I woke up to an email that revealed my modest investment had ballooned into a fortune. I couldn't help but chuckle. It felt like the universe was throwing me a final bone, a way to enjoy my remaining years without financial concerns. I was more than secure now, and for the first time in ages, I felt as though I could simply breathe. Not long after, I encountered her. I didn't catch her name at first. She was a young woman, maybe in her late 20s, sitting on the sidewalk with tears streaming down her face. Normally, I wouldn't have stopped. Getting involved in other people's messes wasn't my style. But something about her struck a chord with me. She reminded me of someone, perhaps Lily, or who Lily had once been before everything fell apart. I pulled over, asked if she was okay, and we started talking. She was in a bad place. Her husband had just cheated on her, and she felt utterly lost. I recognized that same turmoil in her eyes: anger, confusion, desperation. So, I shared a snippet of my story with her. Not the whole saga, but enough to let her know she wasn't alone, that life didn't end with betrayal. I don't know if my words helped her, but I like to think I offered her a glimmer of hope, a bit of strength to navigate whatever lay ahead. As for me, I had everything I could ever need: money, freedom, and the tranquility of knowing my past was behind me. The clock was still ticking, sure, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't running from it. I was simply living. It's intriguing how life seems to slow down when you realize your time is limited. I used to dread the thought of it, that I was merely a ticking clock destined to hit zero. But after everything I'd endured and experienced, I was no longer afraid. I had accepted my fate. I knew it was coming, and oddly enough, I felt prepared. The doctors had been accurate in their prognosis. The disease was slowly catching up with me. I could feel it in my bones, in the way my body ached a bit more each day. I wasn't as sharp or energetic as I used to be, but it didn't matter. I had packed more living into these last few years than most people do in a lifetime, and that was more than enough for me. I refused to let this drag on, though. No hospital rooms, no doctors, no endless treatments. I had lived life on my own terms, and I was determined to leave the same way. So I began to make plans, not the morose kind, filled with wills and funeral arrangements, but meaningful ones. I figured out where I wanted to go, who I wanted to say goodbye to, and how I wanted to exit this world. I was determined to go out without regrets, without any loose ends. The first step I took was to sell off the last remnants of my possessions. There wasn't much left, just a few personal items, mementos from my travels, but I didn't need them anymore. I wouldn't be around to enjoy them, and there was something liberating about shedding it all. My bank account was more than healthy, thanks to that unexpected tech investment, and I knew I had enough to take one final journey. I'd always dreamed of visiting a remote corner of Patagonia, where the mountains kissed the sky and the world felt untouched by time. It was wild, beautiful, and utterly isolated, exactly where I wanted to be when my time came. So, I booked a one-way ticket. No plans to return. I had no need for them. Before I departed, however, I had a few matters to settle. I wasn't one for grand gestures, but I wanted the people who mattered to know where I stood. So, I wrote letters. Not the overly sentimental kind, but honest, straightforward notes. I expressed what I needed to say, thanked some, apologized to others, and left a few final thoughts for those who had crossed my path. One of the most challenging letters to pen was to Lily. I had spent so long harboring hatred for her, pouring so much energy into plotting her downfall, but I realized I couldn't carry that burden with me to the end. I didn't love her anymore, not in the way I once did, but I also didn't want to die with that weight on my shoulders. So, I forgave her, not in a dramatic, face-to-face confrontation, but quietly, through a letter. I told her I forgave her for everything, that I didn't harbor any resentment anymore. I didn't mention my part in her downfall, how I had dismantled her life piece by piece. She didn't need that information, and I wasn't seeking her forgiveness either. This was solely for my own peace. I sent the letters out a few days before my departure. No fanfare, no dramatic goodbyes. Just a final note from a man ready to close the chapter on this part of his life. Then I set off. Patagonia was everything I had envisioned and more. The mountains loomed like silent giants. The air was crisp and invigorating. The solitude was exactly what I needed. I rented a small cabin in an area so remote that days could pass without encountering another soul. It was perfect. I spent my days hiking through the wild landscapes and sitting by the fire at night, watching the stars light up the sky as if they were putting on a celestial performance just for me. I had no plans, no timeline. I was simply there, savoring the moment, fully aware that one day I would close my eyes, and that would be it. There was a certain peace in that certainty. No more running, no more chasing. Just calm. During those final weeks, I did a lot of thinking. I reflected on my life, on the choices I'd made. I wasn't a perfect man, far from it, but I had lived. I had taken risks, stood up for myself when I was wronged, and ultimately found a strange sense of peace. I wasn't leaving behind a legacy in the traditional sense, but that didn't concern me. I had made my mark on the lives I touched, for better or worse. That was sufficient. There was one evening, though, when the reality of it all really hit home. I was sitting on the porch of my cabin, the sun setting behind the mountains, the air cooling with each passing moment. And I just knew. I knew my time was approaching. I wasn't scared. I didn't feel sorrow. I just felt ready. I went inside, stoked the fire one last time, and settled into its warmth, contemplating everything and nothing all at once. I thought about Lily, Jake, Chloe, and all the people I had encountered along the way, the strangers who had shared snippets of their lives with me. I smiled, realizing that in my own way, I had made peace with it all. That night, I drifted off to sleep, fully aware that I wouldn't wake up again. And that was okay. It was the kind of ending I had desired. Quiet, on my own terms, with no regrets.